All right, guys, today we got another good conversation for you. We're talking with a longtime teammate here at Sunset Solutions. He's a design engineer. He's been on my team, working with him for about 11 years. Phenomenal guy. He's got a heart for discipleship, a heart for the Lord, a heart for the Great Commission.
He's also moving into our mission mobilization role here at Sunset Solutions. We're talking about our friend and coworker, David Palmer. My name's Mike Tapia.
And I'm Cody Hall.
And this is the Go and Send podcast. All right, David, it's good to have you here with us today, man.
Yeah, good to be here.
I want to dive right into something. Question: what is a mission mobilizer?
So that could be answered a lot of ways. The way I would generally view it is someone who is helping others understand how their lives fit into the Great Commission, helping others understand that everybody is called to be part of the Great Commission. If you are a follower of Jesus, it is inseparable from the Great Commission. You are called to do that. It isn't a question of if I'm called to be part of the Great Commission, it's a question of how. And so I view being a missions mobilizer as helping people understand their life biblically, how it fits into the Great Commission, and what that could look like for them. So that can take a lot of different avenues, but really the biggest thing is helping people view their life, their future, even just right now, how God does. What are God's purposes for my life?
Yeah. Wow, that's well said and succinct. And you know, I think about the word mobilize and like what's that mean? Like, you know, I think it kind of like driving somebody to action, like mobilizing somebody. You could mobilize troops, or you mobilize, you know, a movement, but mobilizing is getting somebody toward action, and I think that's like what you're saying there, like getting people to realize their role in the Great Commission. That's right there, and it's something that really probably, you know, convicting to myself. We all should be, as believers in the Lord and the significance of the gospel, we should all be part of this. And I know you've thought a lot about this in this area of mobilizing. You know, it's been awesome to work with you here at Sunset and in your role. I know that you have a background more in engineering. So what is it that you're particularly doing at this moment here at Sunset?
So currently, my primary job responsibility is, I would usually describe it as a design engineer. My background's mechanical engineering, so most of the problem solving that I'm doing revolves around mechanical things, but I also do a good amount of electrical stuff, and various things just to help our partners solve the problems they're facing to better reach the people God's called them to reach, right? So my role right now is more so on the development side of things, though, than like a production side. So it is, okay, we need to come up with a new thing for a partner, right, to solve a new problem, or we have a solution and we need to improve on it. So what's kind of the next iterative development step? So that's the primary thing that I'm currently doing here at Sunset.
And I've had the privilege to work with you for 11 years now. You and I started as interns 2013, summer of 2013. Yep. You've been able to teach me a lot over the last number of years. Really enjoyed working with you. Obviously, that's the design engineer side of things, and the engineering, the problem solving, the critical thinking. But you're moving into a mobilizer role really soon. And that's exciting in a lot of ways. It's a little sad. I'm a little bummed that I lose some bandwidth, a lot of bandwidth on design and production and solving problems for partners. But this isn't a new thing for you either. So you've been a mobilizer in different ways for a long time. How else have you been doing mobilizing and discipleship at Sunset or in other areas of your life lately?
Yeah, so I think that ever since I've been in ministry here with Sunset, it was pretty early on that it was just kind of seeing the need for more people, right? So like understanding that when Jesus says the harvest is plentiful and the laborers are few, like that is just immensely true still. Like that has not changed. And so I think even as I got into missions, felt the call, and then started to understand like the scope, right? I'm in missions because I want to help fulfill the Great Commission, right? The end goal is like Revelation 7. You're going to have people from every tribe, tongue, and language worshiping together. So it's like, at some level, being in missions means I'm trying to figure out how do we get there. Now, that's a huge thing, and this is a small part of it. But pretty quickly, if you start thinking about that well, you're going to see that more people need to respond, people need to go. And so because of that, that just has always been a natural part of being in ministry, because you're talking to people all the time, right? So we're all supported missionaries. So it's like you have all your supporters, you're sharing at churches regularly, you're doing all these things that are in front of people who aren't in missions most of the time, right? So naturally, a step in that process is you meet someone who's like, whoa, that's really cool. I didn't know you could do that, right? And so then it's like, well, maybe you need to think about this, right? So that's just kind of a natural part of being in ministry, I think, is like everybody in ministry is going to be doing mobilization at some level. Obviously, that's going to be to various degrees and capacities, but everybody in ministry, if you're a supported missionary, you have a platform, right? So it's like that is going to lead towards these kinds of things. More specifically, it's, our whole staff are involved in like our general recruiting stuff. So like career fairs, or, people come and visit who are interested. And so you're meeting with them, you're talking with them, you're working through what would it look like for you to come here. You work with interns and you're having discussions about what would it look like to come back, and so like mobilizing is just kind of baked into what we do in a lot of ways.
So that's really on the Sunset side too. You're involved also, I know, at the church that you're part of, which I also am part of. How are you doing discipleship mobilization there?
Yeah, so mobilization definitely happens in a slightly different way, because there's less of a, I think, like, here's where I'd like you to plug in, right? When it's with Sunset, it's like, I want you to come here, right? We need people. Now, that's not always true. Like, I love when people go anywhere in ministry. I always consider that a win. But in the church mobilization, at least what I've done, I've worked with high school kids for years. High school kids are a little different, right? They're not at a place where they're going to go start a career right out of high school and stuff. So even just where they're at in life's a little different. But the big thing is tying back to how are they understanding and viewing their future? How are they thinking about their life? So I'm always working with kids that I disciple, kids that I meet with, of trying to help them think through, what does life after high school look like? What does life after maybe even college look like? What are my priorities in life? Is it, your typical American dream stuff of go do whatever I want to do, and I'll kind of figure out how to follow Jesus later, which is, people wouldn't necessarily put it that way, but that's usually how people are kind of viewing their lives. Or is it one that's biblically rooted, that's saying, okay, Lord, where do you want me? And I'm following you wherever that is. I'm not kind of figuring out what do I want to do and then figuring out how to put the Lord in later. So that's a lot of what stuff in the church looks like. And some of it's just having conversations with people, right? With high school kids, that's often like, hey, okay, what are you going to do after you graduate? Well, I'm going to go, get this degree from this college or whatever so I can go get this job. And, part of mobilizing is just being willing to say, why? And ask the hard question of like, so where's the Lord fit in that? Is that something you feel like the Lord's calling you to? Why or why not? Just asking some of those hard questions, not in a way that I'm trying to back them into a corner, but in a way that I'm trying to challenge their thinking. I'm trying to challenge their assumptions about life. Most high school kids, most believers I've actually found haven't thought very hard about this. That's part of the problem. It's not a super intentional choice in our culture often to say, I'm not going to give my life to the Great Commission. It's really more of an ignorance thing. It's something that's a far bigger issue that's underlying in the church of, we're not challenging people to think rightly about the point of their life. And we're too content to let people kind of direct that, let our culture direct it, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot there to unpack, and just even thoughts of like how the church plays into missions. And I think something really neat about you, David, is just seeing like how your skill sets have played into ministry. You have this background in engineering. You don't come from the traditional mission kind of not the person that you would think, oh, that's a church planter, or or like,
Right.
oh, there's the pastor, but your background being an engineer, and then you have a real heart for people, and I think that's always shown through in your work with the local church, and just how you disciple people, and you want to be involved with people, and seeing how the Lord's been able to use these skill sets. And there's a lot of things I want to like dive into and start unpacking here, but just curious, like, of how did you even get to this place here in ministry? Here you are at Sunset Solutions, a supported missionary serving here. What happened like in your upbringing? Were you involved in ministry that started to make you think about missions? What was some of the things that growing up started to influence you toward serving?
Yeah, there's like a couple big things that I think of. So I did grow up in a church, and it was a church that has like a really strong missions emphasis. So always working with missionaries and bringing people, there were always missionaries in the church and stuff. So that was part of it. I grew up, the odd thing for me, maybe not super odd, but the slight nuance to that is that I grew up in church thinking I was saved, but I really look back and I'm not very confident that it's like, if I died in high school, I'm not sure that I would have been saved, right? So I knew a lot of things intellectually. Sure. Right? I grew up around this stuff, but it was much more, I'm going to be the good kid. I'm going to kind of like go through the motions. There wasn't really a relationship with the Lord there. Yeah. But the Lord still used that. So I had a uncle and aunt who almost my entire childhood lived in Nepal doing ministry. So that was just always something that was like kind of normal in my family, even, of seeing some examples of that. And then I'm growing up in a church where missions is very normal, right? There's always missionaries coming through. That's an emphasis of the church. There's lots of financial support. They do lots of like short-term trips and have like some cool partnerships and stuff. And so it was like, again, it's just these things that I'm seeing, and that's fairly normal for me, because when you grow up, it's like whatever your experience is what you think is normal for everybody until you get older and realize that's not quite right. But for me, missions was just kind of a normal thing. And so the Lord was using all of that. And then I had the opportunity to go to Uganda after my senior year of high school. I still wasn't a believer. But again, it was just like kind of being involved, seeing the world. It was just like this thing that was like the Lord was kind of working towards. And then really just growing up with Christian parents and a family that's always been supportive of those kinds of things and stuff was too. Even like, hey, I want to go to Uganda. My parents were like, great, let's figure out how to make that happen, right? There wasn't pushback there. There was just like, yeah, that's awesome. Let's do it. Yeah. So that was kind of, in terms of my upbringing, those were some things the Lord was using to at least put missions on my mind, some exposure to it, to start thinking about, at least have a view of missions.
Sure. Wow. So that sounds like pretty unique in a lot of ways, but then in other ways, I think people could relate in the sense that, they maybe grow up with a lot of head knowledge of the Lord, but there's a point in life where it's like, do I truly believe this message? Do I believe what Jesus did on the cross, that he really died on the cross for my sins and rose again, that by faith in him alone, I could be saved and have a relationship restored with the Lord? Like, there's something that clicks, right? And you have to make a you decision, not your parents' decision. But you're seeing this ministry going through, and you still have this open heart. So I'm just curious, like, what is going on in your mind? Like, do you see this as just like these are good things to do, or like what's kind of driving you to make some of these choices, like going to Uganda?
Yeah. So most of it up through high school was really like, this is cool. This will be fun. There was no long-term plans or even real interest. It was like, cool, I'll go to Uganda for 2 weeks. That sounds like really fun, more so than like, wow, that's an opportunity for the Lord to work.
Sure,
your typical
adventure. Go to
right, exactly.
Africa.
So that's definitely how I viewed more things at that point. And a big part of that was because it's like, I don't think I was a believer. So it's like the lens through which I was viewing that was very much just like, what am I getting out of it? Is this going to be fun type of a thing? The cool part of it is once I went to college and got saved, actually understood the gospel and responded to that as a freshman in college. Once I was a sophomore, I had an opportunity to go back to Uganda. And that was like a totally different organization, totally different thing. But because I'd been there before, it was like when the opportunity came up, I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I would love to go back, right? And so that was something the Lord actually really used. And that trip was much more, okay, I'm at a much better place spiritually. And so starting to think through things, and actually it was coming back from that trip where I really started to ask questions about my life, right? So it's like I'm over there as a believer now, really trying to minister, right? Really trying to see people understand the gospel, really trying to invest in, we were working with street kids in Uganda. So it was like, it's just really broken. It's really sad. You got like elementary age kids who are like doing drugs and like just they're homeless kids, like nobody likes them, they're the outcasts of society, at least there. And so it's very heartbreaking, it's very challenging. It's like, whoa, there's just some big heavy stuff there. And I'm coming back and thinking, is giving my life to make a bunch of money as an engineer really worth it? So that's when the Lord started to really kind of force me to process through some of those questions. Like, what am I doing with my life? I got one life to live. Are all these kind of assumptions and plans of what my life should be oriented around, where am I getting that from? Are those valid? Well,
one thing that just kind of like makes me think of too is just kind of the impact that short-term mission trips can have. Because sometimes I think my dad, he led short-term mission trips for high school seniors to the Dominican Republic. And a lot of times he faced the critique of, is this really worth it? Like, I mean, are you guys really making an impact with these ministries on the ground? And, it's only a week and all these things that are like the kind of short-term mission trip kind of gets good, important questions to ask. But I think there's one piece that sometimes is missed in the short-term mission trip is the impact it can have on those who are traveling. Because a lot of times a short-term mission trip, people who are going have not necessarily been exposed to ministry or even exposed to the needs in this world. And just, it's interesting to see how that had such a huge impact. Cool that you had it before you felt you were a believer and after you felt you were a believer. Wow.
And then sort of the the connection point there, during that time, you're part of a church, right, in college, and you're part of Cru, I think you've said, as a ministry there at Virginia Tech, at the college there. How did those two elements, like the life of the local church, and I know you've told me in the past you've formed really healthy relationships with your pastors at that church.
Yeah.
How did their input in investing in your life, and then even Cru and serving there, being invested in and discipled there, how was God using that at the same time when you're processing through these questions, having just got back from Uganda?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack because just that was such a formative time of my life. Obviously, lots of growing and maturing. So Cru is the ministry I got saved through, really. But one of the coolest parts of Cru, or the thing that I look back on and think, man, I'm so thankful for that, was just Cru's emphasis on discipleship. So as a sophomore, I was getting discipled. And as a junior, I started discipling others, right? And so just having that experience of being discipled and discipling others is very much part of the Great Commission. Go and make disciples, right? So like, what does it mean to make a disciple? What does it mean to help? One of the definitions I really like to use for discipleship is presenting others mature in Christ. It's helping people look more like Jesus. Ultimately with the goal that they will go and help others look more like Jesus, right? So there's a replicative element of it. Replicative. There we go. So that was something that Cru really instilled in me, just the importance of discipleship, but it also gave me the experience and the tools to do it and just kind of like the confidence to like, oh yeah, this is great. That's a big part of why I still do youth ministry and I disciple kids, and that's something I'm passionate about. But also Cru just has a really solid perspective on world missions as well, right? Lots of opportunities to send people, lots of opportunities to be involved in the Great Commission in the U.S. and all over the world. And so that's something that they encourage strongly and push towards. So that was good because I was in a culture and an environment that valued missions, that saw the need, that was passionate about equipping people, not just to like know more about the Bible, but to go and do, right? To go and make disciples. to go and equip others, to go and reach the unreached. So Cru was super helpful, so many ways. But then also the local church was really impactful. So getting involved in the local church, there was just something, again, God connected me with the right people. That's actually how I ended up here at Sunset. So one of the elders at that church, he was a missionary, he still is, with Missionary Aviation Fellowship. And so it's like I was coming back from a trip, sharing some thoughts of like, man, I think I want to do missions. I don't know what that looks like. I'm getting a degree in engineering. I don't know. And he's like, hey, did you know you can use engineering in missions? And here's some ministries that do that, right? And I was like, my mind was just blown.
That's
right?
Cool.
Like,
right there. He was a mobilizer, wasn't he? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So it's like he helped connect those dots, because it's like by that point, it was like, okay, I'm pretty sure I want to go do missions. But at that point, my only concept of missions was like, you could do church planting, like medical missions, and you can like work with kids, like kind of the basics. Like there's not, and it was like, okay, I don't know if I would be great at church planting or something, but it's like, okay, I'm sure I could find something in there that I could do. But also like, I do enjoy being an engineer and I'm getting this degree, but it feels like I should be able to use that, right? So like the church was influential in that, but even I think the church was influential because it put people around me who were willing to ask hard questions. So the pastor there, Brett, who's just a really good friend of mine, as I was really starting to process through this, so at this point it was like, okay, I knew I could use engineering. I knew there were some opportunities, but it kind of your typical college kid, I was probably a little bit fear of commitment, unsure of like, do I really want to go that route? I don't know.
There's a lot of uncertainty in that season of life, right?
Oh, yeah. So it's just hard. And so I'm talking to Brett about this, and he, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he essentially just called me stupid. He's just always a blunt guy, which, really I think I appreciate and really needed at the moment.
And you sort of model that too. You're a little blunt sometimes.
It's something I've has worn off or rubbed off on me a bit. But I was talking to Brett, this was, I was a junior, so I was looking for an internship, right? Kind of that's the year most people do an internship, like a real focused with your degree internship. And I was kind of like applying all over the place. So your normal kind of, like GE or whatever, right? The big engineering companies and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I was kind of processing through this with him and saying, yeah, but after I graduate, I think I want to do missions. And he was like, that's just stupid. Why would you go do an internship with a company you have no interest in being involved with long term? Why wouldn't you see how you could find somewhere where you can do an internship that is ministry related, where you can kind of figure out if that's where you want to go, right? And he just really challenged me to like, oh, yeah, I'm still really thinking about my future, and even just like the path through college, very much how our culture thinks about it, right? So there are all these things, even though the Lord was working on my heart towards like, I feel called to ministry, I want to do this, there were all these things that were still working against me, right? Of just, because there's like years of assumptions and just kind of like, what we've been told and what we're told is like the normal path and all these things that it's like, oh yeah, that makes no sense. But it was like I was almost blind to that and kind of needed people to point that out to me. And so, God just really used the local church to have those hard conversations, because there were people who knew me, that knew my heart, that knew what I wanted to do, and were able to speak into my life. And call me on some things and ask the hard questions, which was something I really needed. And that's something I really try to do now is like, I try not to be afraid to just ask hard questions, even if I don't know people that well sometimes. But it's like, why would we not ask those questions? What's more important, eternal lives or how much money you're going to make?
Sure. It sounds like what a blessing to have men like that and people like that in your lives to ask those questions. And your background coming from Virginia Tech, you're in a school, pretty good engineering school. Sure, lots of your peers are in that class are looking for some pretty high-end engineering positions. And like, what did you like? Did you face any like pushback from friends in your class or others? So you had great people encouraging you. Did you have people that were trying to like discourage you on the same front?
I think thankfully not really. Now, I had friends that I had to work through that with where they were feeling called to missions and, they had a parent or something who was just like not a believer and was like, why would you ever do that? And that was always challenging to kind of help friends. I'm thankful that I didn't have those pushbacks. Like, I don't know if I would have ended up here if I did. I think God knew what he was doing, right? Yeah. There was definitely some strangeness to it, though. I remember being on my senior design project, and so I'm working with like 20 guys who aren't believers. And it's like, okay, you're getting to that point where people are like accepting jobs, and it's like, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm doing this missions thing. And they're like, so you don't get paid? Like, you have to, like, what? Like, yeah, they weren't believers. So, like, their concept for it was non-existent. Yeah. So you get, like, a lot of just, okay, you're crazy type of stuff. But generally speaking, it's like the people who were close to me in life were like, this is awesome. How can we help you do it? How do we be a part of that? So I was thankful for that support, and I think that's really important. That's why discipleship, I think, is so fundamental, because discipleship happens in deep relationships, right? And so having those deep relationships with people who are walking closely with the Lord, who are thinking biblically about their life and your life, like those are the people you need around you to help process through what is the goal of my life? Where am I going? What am I doing? Because they're going to give you wise counsel. And so I think I just was blessed to be surrounded by a lot of those types of people.
And thinking about those, there's a few points there. Think about, okay, older, wiser believers. In this case, a pastor who was willing to be a little blunt with you, willing to challenge the assumptions. I think you probably call him a mentor, right?
Yeah.
A mentor. He was a mentor, a spiritual mentor to you. I think that mentoring in my life, and I've shared this before, but mentoring, I can always point back to the periods of the most growth in my life were when I was being mentored by someone older, wiser, who challenged me in those ways and pushed me. How did, and maybe even extending to today, how is mentoring playing a role in your life? Folks investing in you. I know you're investing in a lot of people. How are folks investing in you, and what role do mentors play for you?
Yeah, mentors have always played a pretty big role. It's always been something that I've just valued and sought out, because really I feel like the times where I've grown the most spiritually have always been pretty directly related to being mentored. So it's just like, okay, if I want to keep growing, I got to keep getting mentored, So even now it's like, I regularly meet with our pastor, and he's one of my best friends, I would say. But it's like there is just a lot of healthy spiritual growth that comes from that, from being mentored and being invested in having people who can see your life, who can see blind spots, who can call you on things, who kind of have the freedom to ask the hard questions and point out sin and rebuke you and challenge you and push you. And that's just where I think it's so valuable. Like, the Christian life is not one we do alone. And just even biblically, you see that model of, discipleship, right? Of mentoring, of coming alongside believers, of caring enough about someone else to want to see them grow, and caring enough to not be content with them not growing, right? Not to be content with stagnation. And so, like, having someone who cares for you like that is just, that's pretty amazing what the Lord will do with that, and the way that can just instill growth. But then it's not just so that I can grow and be better. It's so that I can then go and do that as well for others, right? It's never just kind of a pouring into the glass to no end, right?
Sure.
It's always to then, okay, I can go do more ministry. I can go do more things for the Lord through these things.
And you said you sought that out. You sought out mentors.
Yes.
That's something I've seen is the ones the folks that have mentored me, the guys that have mentored me, I've sought them out. And so I'm thinking to myself, if I hadn't had the courage to go seek them out, would I've had this relationship? Would I've enjoyed the growth that came from it? Would this person have been able to invest in me? And I think the answer is no. What advice would you have, like, for folks who are maybe on the edge, man, that mentoring sounds really great. I don't know how to go about asking for that. I don't know who to approach.
Yeah, I think like for me, the big unlock with that was just what do I care more about here? One awkward conversation or the long-term benefit that this is going to bring? You know, it's just like, if I have one life to live and I want to be as effective as I can for the gospel, for the Great Commission, you know, I don't have time to mess around with not pursuing those things that are going to just bring benefit across the board, right? It's just like, you know what, your priorities got to be right. But I think once your priorities are aligned biblically with, okay, what's the most important thing? Well, it's, I need to look like Jesus so I can go help others know Jesus, right? Like, okay, well, the obvious step in that is I need somebody to help me with that. And I care far more about the end goal than I do about, you know, the awkward steps in the process. So it's just like a no-brainer at that point.
So like, who do you look for, and like, how do you approach them? And
so for me, it's always just been someone I've connected with well, who I could look at and say, man, that person, like, to some extent, they look like where I want to be spiritually. You know, it's like, you know, it's always been someone that I look at, I'm like, man, that's just a godly dude. Who like loves the Lord and loves people and is like pouring their life out for the gospel. Those people are always pretty obvious. And and it's someone that it was like, and I just enjoy them. And so I'm going to ask, you know, I'm going to see if they'll meet with me. They might say no, they might not be able to, and that's okay. That has happened, you know? But there's, I think there's no shortage of those people. And I think that really, if you're praying about it, it's like, it'll be pretty obvious who are some people in your life that you could ask to mentor you. Yeah.
And so, like, just to be like real practical in it, like, what do you do? Do you just say, hey, you mentor me? Like, what do you do? What do you go up to? You like, hey, I need to be mentored and you're the one to do it? Or how do you do that? Or do you just be like, hey, I just want to get coffee and have a conversation, and then you slowly say, can we study the Bible next week? Or what do you actually do? How did you develop those relationships?
Yeah, so for me, I've always just been a pretty to-the-point person. So maybe that's a little easier for me than others. I don't know. But usually it was like a pretty just straightforward conversation. Hey, here's the deal. I need to be growing. I think you're great. I think you have a lot that you could... a lot to offer, so to speak, you know, like I see value, like I would love to learn from you, and would you be interested in discipling me and mentoring me? And that can look like whatever, you know, both in times where I've been the one being discipled and when I've been the discipler, it's just like countless different ways that looks and goes, and it's all valuable, right? So it's not like, okay, you have to follow this very specific formula. It's like, no, you meet, you know, the word's going to be central in some way, prayer's going to be central in some way, and really the rest of it, the Holy Spirit's going to work out, and that's fine, you know? So it's just like, hey, are you willing to meet? And we can figure it out as we go.
Sure.
You know?
The thing, too, that you mentioned a little bit earlier, which I thought was very important too, is, you know, you're finding mentors to pour into you, but it's not just for nothing, right? Then there's this sense of, you know, then going out and discipling somebody or helping somebody and being, I'm guessing, also intentional on that side. You know, sometimes it's you're the one being intentional. Somebody might not be intentional to approach you, maybe they will, but how do you then take that to the step of, okay, I have these great mentors in my life. Wow, Lord, thank you so much for these people who are encouraging me. How do I now go out and intentionally disciple somebody?
Yeah, so then taking it from being discipled to discipling is actually pretty easy, because you just go do what people did with you. And really the hardest place to start with discipleship is if you've never had somebody do it with you, because it's more unknown. I don't think it's actually that hard, but it's like you just don't have that benefit of somebody has come alongside you and kind of just done it with you, that you can call on that experience. You know, so much of Scripture, it's like Paul talks about, imitate me as I imitate Christ, right? There's this imitation element to the Christian walk. And I think that's what discipleship is. Sure. So if you've been discipled, going and discipling someone else is real easy. Now, sometimes people need a little push. The guy who discipled me in college, Adam, at one point he just told me, so you've got to start discipling someone or we're not going to meet anymore. And it was like, okay. You know, and it was like, and then he helped me figure out, okay, who's that person going to be and all those things. It wasn't just like, go figure it out. But it was like, oh yeah, okay, this is pretty serious. Like we're not just like hanging out to have a good time, right? This isn't just like, hey, we're buddies and we get together and we shoot the breeze for an hour once a week. And that's not discipleship.
Yeah.
Discipleship has a purpose, and that's spiritual multiplication.
Yeah, that's good. And obviously it takes place ideally in the local church.
Yes.
And there is sort of a generation to generation. So it's like someone older generally. It can be same age, but it's generally someone a little bit older, a little more mature spiritually and in life, a little more life experience, pouring into the life of someone younger. You've been involved in youth group at our church for many, many years and have been discipling guys through that. How'd you get started with the youth group? What do you see as the importance of youth ministry, and sort of how have you integrated discipleship into that?
Yeah, so coming out of college and Cru, where it's like you kind of have this real easily structured discipleship process, right? You know, on a college campus, because everything's so transient, you just kind of are plugging people in and stuff, and so it works really well. That doesn't really work in the local church the same way. There's a lot of differences from a college ministry to a local church, obviously. But coming and plugging into a local church, it was like, where's the easiest? Because I was right out of college, right? So it's like, I'm not going to go disciple like a 35-year-old dude, you know, like
Sure.
maybe there's like a world where like maturity-wise that's like appropriate, but like there's just so many other weird things going on that usually that's just doesn't work super well. So it was like, well, there's high school kids. And that just seems like an easy place for me to start discipling people or keep discipling people, right? It was just like I came out of college saying like, yeah, I'm called to disciple. So who are the best candidates for me to start discipling? And youth ministry was just like the no-brainer as a kid right out of college. So it was just kind of talking with our youth pastor, hey, I would love to serve. What would that look like? Getting plugged in and then just starting to build relationships with kids and find some kids who I thought would really benefit from it, right? So there's a little bit of kind of a selection process there initially of like, you got to get to know people and understand who do I mesh with well and who would really have some benefit from this, right? Who's ready for it maturity-wise even? That's more true with high school kids than I think like college kids or older once you're out of college. But, you know, who's gonna put the work in for this? Who's really going to value it? Who's going to want it? And so then it's just been, working through things, trying to help them where they're at and figure out how do I help them get to look a little bit more like Jesus, right?
And I think the process, like where you're at in it now, you've got a lot of experience and you're actually helping our church to form really a scaled up discipleship ministry. I know that's something we've had conversations about personally, but what's that looking like? Like, is there a way you could you could say, yeah, there's a framework for discipleship in a local church, and it looks like this? There's so much variety and openness and possibilities that there's a lot of freedom there.
Yeah, so discipleship in a local church is, I think, especially the more like pastors and stuff I've been talking with through this process, the more I just think there's not a systematized methodology you can use. It's always going to break down in the local church. But there are a lot of like low-hanging fruit, obvious things you should be encouraging. So it's like discipleship really should be pretty open-ended and driven by the people involved in it, right? It shouldn't be everybody has to do this specific book or whatever. It should be, here's like a bunch of different stuff that's all valuable and works. Find what works for you, right? So I've done like just straight up Bible studies. I've done like book studies. I've done, like little Bible study books. I've done topical things, like it's just kind of all over the map, right? And I think that that's natural because people are different. I teach and interact differently than you guys might. The people you're meeting with learn differently than the last person you discipled. So it's like there's always just a little bit of let's make this work for us, right? It doesn't have to be, we're not tied to some system. I do think in the local church, one of the things that I'm working towards is really just encouraging people to start. So identifying people in the church who it's like, man, that guy is capable of discipleship, right? Like I can see this person, they've been walking with the Lord for 20 years, for 30 years, for 40 years. And yeah, they've never necessarily formally discipled someone, right? No. But goodness gracious, they are 100% capable. How do I help that person just start doing it? Take that first step, because they don't have the benefit of somebody ever doing it with them, right? So it's how do you help get them over the hump? How do you equip them where they're comfortable enough to take that first step? And so some of that might be finding some people that they connect with that they'd be willing to try to disciple, right? And just start to, how do you get that first relationship going? Because I think once you get the first few relationships going, a lot of it'll just start to run itself. So that's kind of what we're aiming at in our church, is just trying to identify the people that we really think are at a place where, like, spiritually and maturity-wise, they could do this. And so then how can we just help them get started?
And I think we're talking about discipleship, and specifically in the local church, a lot right now for a few reasons. One of which is the church is primary for us. I mean, our philosophy, is that Sunset's not primary. Like, Sunset is in support of the Great Commission globally, but the Jesus himself tasked the church with the Great Commission. Yeah. So we're looking at it, okay, and going all the way back to kind of square one, the mobilizer role that you're about to step into. We're finding, as we've enjoyed hosting and working with interns over the last number of years, it's like one of the ways that we can best help young people today is to help their churches better understand discipleship, better understand the Great Commission. And I know that's close to your heart, so I just wanted to clarify that. But yeah,
that's huge. And making disciples it's part of the Great Commission, right? Exactly. In Matthew 28:18, exactly. Right? Go and make disciples. So I mean, this is huge, and to be part of that in the church, and the church plays a massive role in this, and in missions. It's played a role in your life, even your upbringing. Just hearing your story, your church was really involved with missions even before you were saved, and then you're in Cru, and your pastor's pouring into you, and now you're here in Elkhart, and you're pouring into people in your local church, and so it's super important. Like, what do you think maybe is like a challenge to the local church? Because I think that's unfortunately, I think that missions is maybe not the high priority in many churches. And what are you seeing in that area? And like, why do you what do you identify as a challenge to the churches in this area of thinking toward the Great Commission? Yeah.
So, man, that's just like a loaded question. There's a lot of issues. I think being in missions, I haven't personally seen it as much, but you talk to some of our staff who've been here longer, and it's like there's a very obvious trend that, like, churches are stopping their missions programs. Yeah. Right? Like, every year, more and more churches are just dropping it entirely. They're cutting missionaries. They're just not even doing missionary support and things like that. At least in the American church, right? So that's the only context I really can speak to. And so I do think that, like, really as someone who's seeing the Great Commission, who's seeing kind of biblically, like, this is what Jesus told us to do. Like, Jesus' last words, which, I mean, that should be pretty important. We're commissioned to the church, all believers, to go and make disciples. And so there's a couple things in that. Like, one, I think why we spent so much time talking about discipleship, part of it's because a church that does not do discipleship is not going to be a church that's effective for the Great Commission. Like, being a church that effectively disciples is like a prerequisite to sending, to being involved, to actually, like, equipping your people to go and do. A church that doesn't do discipleship, some people might get sent and equipped, but it's going to be, like, pretty small, pretty few and far between, kind of almost by accident, not by intention. And it's going to be in spite of the local church, really. God's going to do it in spite of the church, not because of the church, is really what it comes down to. So a church that doesn't disciple isn't going to be accomplishing the Great Commission. That's just really what it's going to come down to. A church that doesn't disciple isn't really going to be effective in evangelism. It isn't going to be effective in outreach. It isn't going to be effective in world missions. Those things are just too closely tied together. So that's part of it. That's part of why I think discipleship and encouraging that in a church is so fundamental to mobilization. But then, bigger picture, The American church, I think, just has an unbiblical view of life. Now, this is really big, broad brush strokes. I have been blessed to be parts of churches that like are obviously exceptions to that. But you can't look at our church culture and say the church is committed to the Great Commission. So let me throw a couple statistics I pulled before this just because I think they're really sobering. So over 3 billion people have never had the chance to hear the good news of the gospel. Okay, so that's what we consider unreached people. So, and let me just do a little education. Unreached, the difference between, there's a big difference between unreached and unsaved. So unsaved is someone who it's like, they don't know Jesus, right? Unreached is someone who doesn't know Jesus, but also can't learn about Jesus even if they wanted to. So somebody who lives in America, they could walk into a church. They probably know someone who's a Christian, right? So they have access to people, to resources about Jesus. Somebody who's part of an unreached people group, there's nowhere they can go. There's no one they can talk to. There's nothing they can go find to tell them about Jesus, even if they wanted to, right? So 3 billion people in the world are unreached. They have no way to find out about Jesus, even if they want to, right? Okay, so that's a big problem. So there's 17,000 people groups. So that's usually categorized by languages. Primarily 7,400, 44% of those are unreached. There's approximately 1,000 churches in the world per unreached people group.
Wow.
So for every one of those unreached, those 7,400 unreached people groups, there's about 1,000 churches in the world. Like that is pretty sobering.
Huge. Yeah.
Right? That it's like
Where's
there's
our
this
heart
many
in this?
churches. The big job, if you had to sum up what's the job Jesus told the church to do, it's reach all the nations with the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's number one.
Yeah, because regardless, right? I mean, if you are a believer and you've been saved and you have this hope in Christ, you are to play a role in the Great Commission, regardless of what it is. Maybe
Right.
some are going, maybe not everyone's going. Some will be sending, some will be giving, some will be praying, but you have a role in this. Like you need to be invested in this, and these statistics are sobering.
Right. So it's
probably
like
invested.
you can't look at these statistics and say the church is committed to the Great Commission as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not. Like, and even you can follow the money trail of it. It's like more money is embezzled by the church on an annual basis than goes to unreached missions.
Wow.
Right? Like that's absurd.
Yeah, it is.
Right? So it's like, if you follow the money, that's usually where the priorities are. And you can say that like the American church's priorities is not world missions. It's not the unreached. And so like that's the big problem, right? Is that I think the American church has an unbiblical view of what is the church, of what's our point. I think most people go to church as this is something for me. I feel nice. I get saved. I hang out with my friends. There's some cool activities I can do. And then I just go about my life. It's really like I do pretty much whatever I want. Maybe I give a little bit of money and, that means I'm faithfully following Jesus. And the reality is that's not following Jesus at all. And yet that's what most Christians, at least in America, would equate following Jesus with. And so that's where I would view mobilization having the biggest job, is really just educating people on like biblically what's the purpose of the church in your life, because the church as a whole is not educating people correctly.
And I think the through line we're identifying is a church that is discipling is a church that's going to be sending. They're going to be engaged in global missions. And yeah, I'm glad so to kind of transition sort of to the finance side of the picture, God's work takes finances to advance.
Yeah.
The kingdom is only advanced through God's people, and it takes money to do that. That's a task that he's given us to do. And part of your job, right, as a mobilizer, and certainly the role that you're going to be stepping into as our mobilization team leader here at Sunset Solutions, has that whole fundraising side and training the new teammates that onboard into our team here, training them on a biblical perspective for support raising. That's a big, big thing. Because if you have that foundation down, you can endure a lot. And you can do a lot of hard things if you got that biblical foundation. That's what grounds us and roots us in what God has said. How do you think about support raising? I know you've got a very developed view of it.
Yeah, so support raising, I would think of it how Paul thinks of it in Philippians.
Go straight
So
to the Apostle Paul.
the letter to the Philippians is a letter from Paul to a supporting church.
Yep.
He calls them his partners in the work of the gospel. And so I view support raising as inviting people to be a part of the work God is doing. And that's not just how I view it, that's how the Lord views it. Ultimately, I don't know exactly how like all of this works with like eternal rewards and stuff, but it's like the people who are supporting me and you guys to be here, God is crediting that to some eternal account of like, if somebody gets saved because of the work of our ministry, like ultimately Bob over here, who's giving me $100 a month, you know, like God views it as Bob was instrumental in saving this guy over here who got saved through the ministry, right? It's not just a transaction. So like, I think the big pitfall with people is they view support raising as, well, I'm begging for money. It's all transactional. It's all about money, right? And yeah, like we need finances to be here. But really, support raising is inviting people to be a part of what God's doing. It's giving people an opportunity to participate in the Great Commission. It's casting a vision for what the Lord's doing and saying, hey, I would love for you to join me in this. It's about people. It's about relationships. And it's something that is just really biblically rooted. There's tons of examples in Scripture of like God has always used his people to fund his ministry. You know, it talks about in 1 Corinthians that it's like basically the person in full-time ministry should make their living by the fruit of the gospel, which is the church, right? Like, so the church is the one who's supposed to be giving the living to the people in full-time ministry. And so that's how God has designed this to work. But then there's a huge blessing for us in it too. I mean, it's like, all of us are so thankful for our supporters. It's great when we get to travel and see them and just like share what the Lord's doing and hear what the Lord's doing and pray for them regularly. So that's a little bit of the perspective.
It's like a huge barrier probably at the start, right, of support raising is having a correct biblical worldview, like on it, like a biblical view supported with Scripture, and that's. I appreciate you going straight to Paul like right away, you know, and that, you know, it does kind of point out the reality, you know, there is a biblical foundation for it, especially when it's hard for, I think, the American church in like specifically because we're a very independent culture, you know, like, you know, I, you know, provide for myself kind of thing. But biblically, there is an interdependence. So there's a dependence. There's a dependence on God. There's a dependence on the body. You know, we are to be encouraging and building each other up. So, you know, biblically is an important starting place. What, you know, after you got that biblical foundation, it's still kind of intimidating though, because there's a practical side of how do I do this? Like, how do you encourage somebody who's in this journey of trying to figure out support raising?
Yeah, so at least for us, I really, you know, so if you came and joined our team, you're not going to start doing anything like meeting with people and stuff like that until we are actually confident that you've got everything you need to do it. So like, that's usually where I try to encourage people. It's like, this isn't this thing where it's like, here's an amount you have to raise, go figure it out. This is, okay, we are going to like intentionally really disciple you in what this is. We are going to spend a lot of time working through this with you to make sure that, you know, I am confident as your coach that you have what you need to do the job I'm asking you to do. Like, I'm not going to let you start this until I'm confident of that, because I care about you and I want you to do it well and I want you to have what you need. And so usually that's where I start because there's so much to it. But ultimately, if you had to boil it down, support raising is really taking time to meet with people face to face, to share the vision for what God's given you to be involved with and invite them to be a part of it. Right? It's not, I write a bunch of letters and send them out and hope that people start giving me money. It's really not about the money in a weird way. I think support raising is pretty much like the worst experience ever if all you're focused on is money. Because like when somebody says, no, I can't support you, well, that just ruins your whole day. You know, but when God has given you the perspective that's biblical, that support raising is inviting people into what he's doing, and ultimately it's between that person and the Lord to decide if they're going to give, because God owns all the money anyways. So if God's called you to this thing, he's going to provide for you. Your job is just to go and faithfully invite people to be a part of it, and God's going to bring the right ones. So you don't know how many people you're going to have to meet with necessarily, but if God's called you here, he's going to provide it. It's just a matter of I just got to carry out the work and God's going to make that happen. So when you get that perspective, when I meet with someone who's like, I can't support you, I'm like, that's fine. Like, you know, I'd love for you to just pray and like be a part of this. And I'm excited about it. And, you know, so it's like really even just your identity is rooted in the Lord and how he views it instead of like how our culture views money and all these things, which then makes it not miserable. It makes it really exciting and fun and encouraging. And it's like, how many jobs can you say where it's like part of our job is to like go hang out with like our old college friends and stuff? Like, you know, like that's a pretty cool perk.
It's like one of the things we've talked about in the recent days is like, and you just mentioned it, you touched on it a couple times, this difficult issue of a call, and that's that kind of language. I you know, I have my own views on it, and I think Scripture has some views. I know you have views. One of the things that, like, I didn't necessarily struggle with it, but I think it was because of it, like, almost an absent-mindedness. I guess I guess I can't really claim that I was super tuned in to, like, God's call on me. The way I would describe it is, like, I was just taking that next step, and I would just take that next step, and there was an open door, and I go through the open door, and then I look back, I'm like, that was God's way of calling me, you know, and in the moment I didn't necessarily think about it that way, but I know a lot of folks now, you know, especially younger generations, are thinking this call, you know, I read about this, maybe the person who's discipling me has talked about it, maybe the passage of Scripture we studied this week mentioned it. How do you think about the call to missions, the call to get involved in it, and what are maybe some pitfalls that you see, especially a lot of younger folks having to get through?
Yeah, so that's really like a big one that I would try to work through with people pretty often. So like most people, if you ask them, so what would it take for you to go into ministry? And they'd say, rightly so, a calling. It's like, okay, cool. Like we get it. That's biblically right. That's true. Like the Bible talks a lot about calling, especially in ministry contexts. The problem with that is you got to figure out how people are defining a calling. And that's where most people, they're saying, well, I need to be called. And I think this is just our culture. I don't think it's like people being super intentional, but it's like most people have not thought about like what actually is a calling. They're like, I need to be called, but I haven't taken the time to think through like, what would that even look like? You know what I mean? So it's like, most people are like, well, yeah, I'd have to be called to go into missions. And probably what that means is like an angel's got to show up in your bedroom and tell you to go into missions, you know, like something wild and crazy. And otherwise, I just do what I want, right? Like, and what's the alternative to not being called? And that's really where the problem is. And that's really where I just think people are not looking at their lives biblically. So like, we'll take the Great Commission. Again, a lot of things tie back to that. Go and make disciples of all nations, right? That's given to every single believer of Jesus Christ. You could say that the Great Commission is a calling, very clearly, right? That is some, you know, I mean, a calling is inherently like, you know, a task that somebody else has given you, right? I don't choose a calling either, right? I've used the example before, like, so on my senior design project in college, it was like we built this off-road race car, and it was like, but there were some clear rules. We had to basically use like a lawnmower engine, right? Everybody had to use that, and then you could design everything else on the car. But that meant it's like, well, you got to use a lawnmower engine, which is like kind of wimpy, right? And it's like, so like our team could have said, we're going to use this bigger engine because it'll make the car go faster. And ultimately, we go to a competition, we would have been disqualified before we ever started because we had ignored our calling, right? So the competition is the one who set the calling for the engine, right? They set the rules around that. We didn't get to pick it. And so in a lot of ways, I would view the Great Commission similarly. Jesus has already told you what your life's supposed to be about. He's already given you the thing. But just like with my senior design project, yeah, we were very constrained with the engine, but pretty much everything else on it, we had a lot of freedom with. So there's a lot of ways to be involved. So similarly, Jesus has said, go and make disciples of all nations, but he hasn't said, and here's the only way to do it, or here's the only way to be involved. He's just said, you have to be involved, right? So it's like every single follower of Jesus already has a clear calling in the Bible to go and make disciples.
Good. Yeah.
So it isn't a question of if I'm called to that. You already are. It's just how am I supposed to be a part of that calling that Jesus has already given me?
Wow. So you're like saying too, like, it's like you are called. There's no question there. You're called to be involved. What is that involvement? Are you seeking the Lord to
Right.
understand what that is?
Exactly.
Because there's something that, you are to be involved in this.
Right.
Yeah.
So not everybody is called to be in full-time ministry.
Yeah.
Okay? That's true.
Yep.
But everybody's called to be part of the Great Commission.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I struggle with personally is that, like, at least in the U.S., again, I'll go back to some of these stats, only 1 out of every 1,800 Christians decides to serve in cross-cultural missions. That's like hardly any, right? It's been 2,000 years since Jesus gave us the Great Commission. And just from an engineer's mindset of like efficiency and stuff, we're like a little over halfway there. It feels like we as the church, if we actually like put our minds to it, could have like crushed this 1,000 years ago. So it just makes me ask the question, and this is just kind of my speculation, but like, how many people have disobeyed the call? Right? It feels like, I know that not everybody's called to go, but I feel like there's probably some who the Lord would have sent if they listened and haven't. And so that's kind of part of what I view my job as a mobilizer is, how do I wake people up to the fact that they are called? Right? It's not a question of if. And then how do I get people to the point where they're like, okay, I'm going. It's okay, I'm submitting my life to the Lord. Lord, where do you want me to go? And maybe that he leads you into industry. He leads you down this path. But wherever you end up, you should be able to look back and be confident that that's where the Lord wanted you to go. Right? I think the big problem that we see with at least a lot of American Christians today is they map out their whole life and their whole plan without ever giving thought to, Lord, is this what you want me to do? And I think oftentimes one of the things that is problematic in that is that the Lord still works in spite of those things often, right? And so people look back and say, well, and then God used it this way, so obviously that's where I was called. It's like, okay, that's a little bit of a fishy logic there.
Right. I mean, I could think of 100 things that could keep a person from obeying the call. And I think about the story of Gideon, where he requested signs, multiple signs. God, please confirm this for me. And so I think fear, some risk aversion, there's some of that, uncertainty about the future. What do you see as some of those obstacles, and or have you been able to talk through those obstacles with folks that you're in the process of discipling and mobilizing?
Yeah, so obviously the biggest obstacle is what we've kind of been talking about. Like, people just aren't viewing their life right. So I would usually consider that more of an ignorance issue. I don't think most people are intentionally going that way, but that's how our culture has discipled them. Right?
So people are getting discipled. It's who
Right.
is discipling.
Yes.
Right.
Everybody's getting discipled, but it's who's discipling you, and is that discipleship biblical? And most of the time it's not, right? Because it's our culture, where it's like, okay, you're basically just buying into the American dream of go do whatever I want, make myself happy, and, I can believe in Jesus and be saved forever and don't have to care about anybody else, right? Like, that's kind of the mentality. So that's a big one. Right. I think that's just so fundamental, because if people don't understand that, then none of the other stuff, you don't even get to the other questions. I think oftentimes how people can be involved is a big one as well, because it's like the concept of missions or ministry is like, okay, I could be a pastor, I could translate the Bible, I could, plant churches, I could do something medical, I could work with kids. Maybe there's a couple others that people might throw on that list, but it's like, well, I don't have those skills. So what do I do? Right? And I think, unfortunately, people are too quick to say, well, I don't fit those boats, so I'm just going to go do something else. right? Rather than asking the questions, rather than seeking out other opportunities. And so like usually a conversation I'm regularly having is, hey, there are opportunities. You know, we're all good examples of that. We're engineers in missions, right? That's not like a typical thing. You know, just here at Sunset, we have human resources staff and finance staff and like public relations and media and I don't know that there's like all your typical things you need to run a company, right? Like business management and like IT and, you know, all those things that aren't like the technical thing that we think about when we talk about the mission of Sunset Solutions and all that stuff. But you need all those support staff just to do anything. That's true of every single ministry that's trying to accomplish the Great Commission. Like they need those types of support staff. So it's like, okay, already just in one conversation, your pool of skills that fit into the Great Commission has like quadrupled at least. You know, it's like just you're increasing exponentially of like, yeah, there are some people who've come to me with like, okay, I'm really passionate about like high energy physics or something. And I'm like, okay, you know, you got me stumped on that one. I'm not sure how that fits. But like for your average person, it's like you've probably got a skill set that fits, that could fit in a missions context. So don't rule yourself out. Sure. I think sometimes people also think of ministry or missions as like you have to go to the most remote place. And actually we do need people to do that, right? Like, I mean, even there's stats on like out of everybody who goes, like a pretty small percentage are going specifically towards the unreached. So that's something like I often even think about, man, am I even in the right place here of like, and I think usually the way I think about it is we work with so many ministries and a lot of those ministries are directly working with the unreached. So I see the blessing of that. But the challenge is, how do you just help them see where could you fit? What are the different ways? And how do you even just help them care more about the mission we've been given than about their comfort or their fears or those things, right? So again, that's just coming back to how are we thinking about life? What are our priorities? What's the most important? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. You know, and I love how you're pointing out too, like, you know, you may not necessarily have initially thought of yourself as a missionary, like a church planter or something, but there could be your skills. I mean, even if you are a high-end physics, whatever, particle physicist, you know, maybe there's something there. I mean, who knows even how the Lord could use that in like the universities. I think sometimes these universities with these PhDs are like unreached in some ways, right? They're like,
absolutely.
You know, the amount of, you know, Christian representative in some of these high-end PhD circles, maybe that's an area. So, I mean, even then, it's like, I think the point is to be seeking the Lord and not just be planning without him, because there may be an avenue to which you can be plugging into missions. So how does somebody, they're thinking about it now, they're convicted in this, where do they go? Resources, thoughts, what encouragement would you give to that person now as they're trying to think about missions?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is I would encourage them to really just start praying. So even if it's like, your high energy physics or something, it's like, well, just start praying. You know, that was something for me. It's like, I was probably praying for 6 months to a year before it's like all the dots really started to fall in place of like, oh, I can use engineering in those things. So it's like, it's not just like, it's either I find out about it today or never, you know? So start praying, because it's like, if God wants you to go somewhere, he will absolutely make that happen. And we can trust him in that. But then it's really just educate yourself. I think, you know, ignorance is probably like the biggest enemy of the Great Commission in some way. Of, you know, maybe that's Satan's ploys of, you know, just keeping people unaware of reality. But, you know, we can put some links in the show doc or something, I'm sure. So like we use a study called Explore with our interns, which is cool. It's like I've walked through a number of interns and we've gone from basically this perspective of I'm doing a cool summer, but like long-term missions isn't really a thing. It's just like, this is just a cool opportunity. And then I'm going to kind of go do what I want. And then, so we go from that to like, oh my goodness, like I'm thinking about my life backwards. Right. So we just kind of walk through them. It's pretty short. It's like seven lessons. You could do it by yourself. You could do it with a friend. You could do it with a group. You know, that's an awesome one. I'd highly recommend.
They could even reach out to us, so we'd be happy to get them a copy
Yes.
of the Explore study.
Yes.
Who's that by? Do you
so it's put out by VIA.
VIA, okay. Explore Study by VIA.
Yeah. There's, if you want something more intensive, like the Perspectives class is awesome. That's, I think it's like 6 months or something. It's pretty, but it's a similar concept. It's helping you think about what's my perspective on world missions, on life, on the Bible, those things. I'd encourage you to like read some missionary biographies. There's just tons of good ones. I think of like Jim Elliot, Hudson Taylor. There's lots of just like really awesome ones. And, those stories are encouraging and challenging. I can put a few links in there in the show doc too with some other resources we could point you to. But then ultimately just talk to people, right? Hey, the missionaries coming to your church, talk to them, ask them, reach out to us, we'd love to just walk through opportunities. And, really I want people to come to Sunset, but ultimately if somebody decides to go into missions anywhere, it's like, really, I'm about the Great Commission. So it's like, I refer people to other ministries all the time, trying to help people find out how they can fit, what that could look like.
We're on the same team.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well,
Harvest
David,
is plentiful, the workers are few.
Oh, absolutely. Matthew 9. David, thanks so much. This has been a wealth of insight, wealth of value, and even some challenge and some encouragement there, some admonition. Dig in, figure out the Great Commission, figure out where you could play a role, and get involved. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, absolutely.